You are the only son of the most dangerous king in English history. You were born to secure a kingdom, but your body is already your enemy. They wrap you in silk, surround you with prayers, and call you England's salvation. But behind every candlelit whisper, they are already mourning you, because power cannot cure a failing lung, because your crown was forged in the shadow of a father's desperation. And no one, not even a prince, escapes the curse of being wanted too much. Before the boy ever drew breath, the kingdom was already dreaming of his name. For years, England had watched its king rage against the silence of empty cradles. Henry VIII, the colossus with a golden beard and blood on his hands, had broken from Rome, dissolved monasteries, and cast aside queens like garments, all for one thing: son, a living son. Catherine of Aragon had given him Mary, but Mary was not enough. Anne Boleyn had delivered only dead whispers. Jane Seymour, quiet, obedient Jane, was the last hope and the last womb. The weight of centuries fell upon her belly dot, so when, on October 12, 1537, St. Edward's Day, the cries of a newborn prince echoed through the cold stone walls of Hampton Court, the kingdom exhaled in ecstasy. The bells rang for 3 days. Bonfires lit the night. Men wept in taverns. Women crossed themselves. A prince, a boy, had been born. They named him Edward, after the pious confessor king. They called him a miracle dot, but behind the fanfare, something else was already stirring. Subtle unease dot, the boy did not feed easily. He slept too much. His skin turned gray in the cold. The midwives exchanged glances but said nothing. Who could speak such blasphemy aloud? This was England's salvation. The child must be strong. No one dared suggest that the boy's life might already be a negotiation with death. For Jane, the price of a crown was soaked in blood and linen. She had done what no woman before her could. She gave Henry his son. But her victory was not triumphant. It was terminal. Just days after the birth, Jane began to fade. Fever clung to her like a second skin. Her breath shortened. Her mind wandered. She smiled deliriously as priests whispered last rites. Historians would later call it puerperal fever, an infection, likely from unclean instruments or hands. But in that moment, they called it divine payment. The Queen had bought England's future with her life. Henry was inconsolable, or so the court chroniclers claimed. In truth, the king had little time for mourning. His heir was alive, and that was the true object of his love. Jane died 12 days after giving birth. She was buried in white, as if still a bride. The baby boy, swaddled in scarlet and ermine, was now the crown's most precious object. He had killed his mother, and in doing so, he had justified his father. The irony? The boy would never know her warmth, and the kingdom would forever praise a mother he never remembered. The nursery was a place of silk, curtains and silent dread. Nannies moved like ghosts, always watching. Physicians came and went with tinctures, poultices, prayers. The baby, Prince Edward, was never alone, and yet always vulnerable. By winter, his cries had weakened. The chill of English air seemed to enter his lungs and linger. A single cough could send ripples of panic through the palace. One servant was dismissed for suggesting the prince looked too pale. For a child of good fortune, it wasn't just love that surrounded Edward. It was obsession. The court feared his death like they feared war or plague. This was not a child. He was a prophecy wrapped in flesh, and flesh, as the tutors knew too well, could fail. Edward's half-sister Mary, now cast aside, watched the spectacle from afar. She had once been the beloved heir until her legitimacy was erased like ink from parchment. Now she watched as a baby ruled her future. Elizabeth, daughter of the executed Anne Boleyn, was even younger, just a toddler. But even she, somehow, was already competition. Because in Tudor England, Survival began in the womb ... and ended at the whim of kings. Edward's every breath was a state secret. When he caught fevers, the candles in the chapel burned all night. When he recovered, proclamations were sent out to calm a jittery court. But something unspoken lingered beneath all the ceremony. What if the child so longed for was not strong enough to keep the crown? The boy does not run. He does not shout, or tumble, or scrape his knees on cobblestone. He's not allowed to. The body of Edward VI is a shrine, delicate, sacred, and carefully measured. He is England's only thread to the future. So every hour of his day is orchestrated like a hymn. The morning begins with prayer, always prayer, then Latin, then Greek, then scripture. Arithmetic comes after, then diplomacy, then moral instruction. Even his play is scheduled, subdued, intellectual. Watched. At 6, he is expected to know the Psalms. At 7, he must recite Erasmus. At 8, he writes letters to foreign monarchs, signed with a trembling royal hand. And all the while, his body lags behind his mind. He grows thin, not tall. He sweats at night, and his tutors quietly replace ink-stained sheets with dry ones before anyone notices. But they always notice, because this is not just a boy. This is the king to be . And he's being groomed, not raised. His meals are tested before he eats. His tutors report on the weight of his words. Every phrase he speaks is echoed by those around him like scripture. He is praised not for joy, but for precision. Not for kindness, but for correctness. The child learns that smiles are dangerous, because even joy can be misinterpreted as weakness. So, he becomes quiet, brilliant, hollow, the kind of boy who does not climb trees, but can debate the nature of divine kingship before his 10th birthday. Edward's caretakers are not parents. They are architects. Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury, oversees his religious formation. Richard Cox drills him in discipline. John Schick sharpens his rhetoric like a blade. They do not soften him. They sculpt him. The goal is not to make a child worthy of the throne, but to make a throne worthy of the child. But no one asks him what he feels. When he writes in his diary, brief, clinical lines, he mentions executions without emotion. Today, they cut off the head of the Duke of Somerset. He writes not as a boy, but as a scribe of destiny. And perhaps he believes it, that his life was never his. That even his breath belongs to England. At banquets, he is seated high above courtiers, who murmur praises as they watch him cough discreetly into a lace cloth. They say he's godly, wise beyond his years, gentle. They never say frail, though they see it, in the way he tires too easily, in the way he sometimes looks through people, as if distracted by some deeper shadow. No one touches him casually. He is bowed to, never embraced. Even his own sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, are kept distant, for protocol, of course, for his health, for appearances. Edward begins to understand that affection is rationed like grain. Too much, and it causes suspicion. And what if the kingdom suspects he is weak? Then the paper crown hovering above him may crumble before it ever touches his head. By the time Edward turns 9, he already understands how to hide his fear. He hears whispers about his condition, that he coughs too often, that his skin burns under sunlight, that his breath shortens after brief exertion. He hears the unspoken truth, that he may not live to wear the crown at all. But to survive, he must pretend otherwise. He learns to sit straighter than he feels, to laugh when his tutors mention legacy, to nod when ambassadors speak of alliances 20 years ahead, alliances he may not survive to see. On paper, he is perfect. On parchment, in portraits, and in carefully crafted reports, he's the ideal heir, wise, pious, determined, but no one paints what's happening beneath his ribcage, the slow erosion, the lungs that betray him with every winter. Still, the rituals continue, the teaching, the grooming, the fiction. Because to stop would be to admit the truth, that the boy they built their kingdom around may never be strong enough to hold it. And that is a truth the tutors and their enemies cannot afford. So they keep the curtains closed. They polish the lie until it gleams like gold. And the boy becomes the lie. He is no longer just Edward. He is the crown. And the crown cannot afford to be sick. It is a cold January morning in 1547, when the bells toll for King Henry VIII. The lion is dead. The throne stands empty, and England holds its breath. In the great hall of Westminster, a small boy with hollow cheeks and 2 large robes is brought forward. His name is Edward. He is 9 years old, and he is now King of England, Ireland, and France. He doesn't cry. He bows his head as if he understands the weight now placed upon it, as if he were not still learning how to spell the names of his ancestors. The crown is far too heavy for his young skull. It's held above him during his coronation, not placed fully on his head, as if even the sacred gold itself hesitates. The people cheered. But behind the fanfare, behind the Latin prayers and the velvet curtains, the truth festers. Edward rules nothing. The real power sits in the shadows, in the hands of men who speak softly but wield daggers of influence. The council has already chosen his protector, Edward Seymour, the boy's uncle, the new Duke of Somerset. He styles himself Lord Protector of the realm. It's a title that smells of duty, but tastes of ambition. And the boy? The boy is watched, guarded, adored, but never listened to. He is the most powerful figure in England, and he is a prisoner of the crown he just inherited. At court, Edward signs laws he doesn't write and approves wars he doesn't start. He is praised for wisdom he hasn't yet spoken, and blamed for nothing. Even as people starve. It's a strange place to live, a palace of mirrors where every adult bends toward him, but none ever bow fully. They pretend he leads. He pretends to believe them. And yet, something in him begins to sharpen. He watches. He listens. He remembers. He knows his uncle Somerset is not just guiding him, but using him. He sees the arrogance, the missteps, the favoritism. The court begins to whisper that Somerset thinks himself king in all but name. And Edward, quiet, serious Edward, begins to write. In secret journals. In private reflections, he begins to document the lies. He is not just learning to reign. He's learning to read power, to understand the way it smiles with one hand and steals with the other. He starts asking questions. Why do we spend so much on war? Why does the Duke command both the army and the treasury? The council flinches. The boy is supposed to be symbolic, not sentient. But Edward is no longer content to be a puppet. He begins to study law, history, reform. He devours texts not just about kingship, but about justice. He doesn't just want to be king. He wants to be better. And that, to the men around him, is dangerous, because a boy king they can control is useful, but a boy king who thinks, that is a liability. As Edward turns 12, his voice deepens slightly, not from puberty, but from resolve. He begins to speak more often at council. He questions orders. He challenges decisions. When famine strikes and rebellion stirs in the countryside, Edward doesn't just parrot what his protectors say. He demands reports. He writes letters. The boy who was once a ghost behind glass becomes something harder to contain. A presence. A voice. And that voice is getting louder. He writes essays on governance. He critiques Catholic practices with fire and fury far beyond his age. His Protestant tutors have fanned that flame, but Edward has added his own kindling. He believes reform is not just holy, it is necessary. And so, when Somerset falls, arrested by the very council that once empowered him, Edward watches without a flicker of sadness. Power shifts again, this time to John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, cleverer, colder, and even more ambitious than his predecessor. But he makes one mistake. He thinks Edward is still the same boy who sat quietly beneath a too heavy crown. He does not see the king rising in the corner of the boy's eyes, because Edward now knows the truth. The crown may be made of gold, but the power behind it is paper thin, torn easily, written over, rewritten again. And Edward? He has learned how to write. It begins with a cough. Small, dry, almost forgettable, the kind a court physician might blame on bad air or melancholic humors. Edward brushes it aside. He is the king. He cannot afford to be fragile, but the cough returns. In the mornings, it sticks to the walls of his throat. By evening, it leaves a trace of red on his linen. Blood. No one says the word. They say irritation. They say strain from study. But the servants start placing more claws near his bedside. The candles in his chamber burn a little longer at night. Something is wrong. He feels it in his chest. A weight. A tightening. Breaths that should be easy become effort. His back aches. His skin burns hot, then cold. Some nights, he wakes drenched in sweat, convinced he is drowning on dry land. And still, he rules. Still, he writes in his journal. Still, he signs proclamations. Still, he smiles at ambassadors and pretends the shaking in his hands is just fatigue. Because what would they do if they knew? If they saw what he saw in the mirror? The boy king turning pale as parchment, the monarch unraveling beneath his own skin. The kingdom cannot afford a sick king. So Edward performs health like a ritual, and the court bows to the illusion. Asterisk, by spring, the whispers grow louder. Physicians come daily now. They argue in Latin, as if hiding the truth in dead languages will keep it from living in the room. One orders leeches. Another prescribes boiled herbs. A third suggests bloodletting. Again, Edward complies. He has no choice. He drinks what they give him. He submits to the blade, the poultice, the prayers. But nothing helps. His cough deepens. His body thins. His nails go blue. His joints ache so fiercely he winces when kneeling for communion. And all the while, he tries to govern. He issues proclamations about poverty relief, even as his own body betrays him. He writes furiously, reforming church doctrine, even when the ink smudges from trembling hands. He is racing death, and death is gaining. Privately, Edward begins to panic. Not because he fears pain, not even because he fears the end, but because he fears meaninglessness. He has always been told he was born for a purpose, that his life was divinely orchestrated to redeem the sins of his father's court, that he would reign with justice, purity, strength. And now, at 15, he fears he will die a ghost, a rumor, a lesson. So he keeps writing, drafting, planning. As if words alone could outpace the sickness crawling up his spine. But even paper cannot hold back time. By June, it's no longer possible to deny it. He cannot rise from bed without help. He cannot speak for long without coughing blood. Courtiers wear the same frozen smiles, but behind them, panic. They've seen this before. In brothers, fathers, heirs. The slow unraveling of royal bodies. But this time, there is no spare son. No backup. Prince in the nursery. Edward is the whole line. The last breath of Henry VIII's legacy. The boy king who cannot breathe. The council meets in secret. Physicians are sworn to silence. Even the bells of London remain still. But outside the palace walls, the people know. Word leaks like smoke. Through cracks, the king is ill. No, the king is dying. Inside, Edward makes one last attempt to control the narrative. He dictates the device for the succession. A desperate, brilliant plan to bypass both Mary and Elizabeth, his half-sisters, whom he sees as threats to his Protestant reforms. He names Lady Jane Grey, his cousin, only 16, as his heir. It is bold. It is reckless. It is the act of a drowning king clawing for continuity. But by now, even the ink betrays him. His signature on the device is shaky, hesitant, the hand of a boy dying before he can become the man he was promised to be. And still, he tries to smile, to reassure his tutors, to hold the scepter with dignity. He does not scream. He does not weep. He simply slips further away, piece by piece, until the crown weighs more than the body it was made for. He lies in silk sheets, ribs rising like broken piano keys beneath his skin, and asks the question no one wants to answer. What will become of England, after me? It is not a philosophical question. It is a scream hidden in formality. A boy king, still only 15, facing the inevitable, that his death might undo everything he's been told his life was meant to build. Edward's mind is clear, even as his lungs betray him. His thoughts do not drift into dream. They sharpen. He has been taught, by reformers, tutors, bishops, that his reign is divine not because of blood, but because of belief. That England is Protestant because he is Protestant. That he is chosen. But his sisters? Mary still clutches the old faith like a dagger. And Elizabeth? Clever, ambiguous, unpredictable. If Edward dies, everything dies with him. And so, in the soft candlelight of his final weeks, he begins to write again. Not sermons, not prayers, but a plan to manipulate fate. The plan begins as a whisper, then a draft, then a command. My lady's heir male. At first, succession will pass through Lady Frances Brandon, the niece of Henry VIII. But then, Edward changes the text, crosses out lines, adds new names. The heir is narrowed, redirected. Finally, it lands on Lady Jane Grey, Frances's daughter, a girl of 16, gentle, pious, Protestant. Safe. Jane becomes his final weapon, not of war, but of continuity. He meets with his council, summons lawyers, orders copies made. The paper itself feels like iron in his dying hands, the only solid thing left in a dissolving world. But it is not just his idea. John Dudley, the Duke of Northumberland, hovers behind the scenes. Jane is his daughter-in-law. Her marriage to his son, Guildford, has already been arranged, a calculated knot of power. Dudley does not oppose the device. He feeds it, pushes it forward with haste, disguised as loyalty. And Edward, weak and hopeful, allows it. He believes he is saving England. He does not see that others are saving themselves. The device is illegal. It breaks the laws of succession set by Henry VIII himself. It denies both Mary and Elizabeth, his half-sisters, despite their blood, despite the Parliament Acts declaring them legitimate once more. But Edward no longer believes in blood. Blood is betrayal. Blood is illness. Blood has failed him. So he places his trust in faith, in ink and signatures and logic and paper. He convinces himself it is righteous. His counsel is coerced. Signatures gathered under royal pressure. Even the Chief Justice hesitates, but Edward's authority, or the illusion of it, still carries weight. And so the plan moves forward. Even as his body moves closer to stillness, he is shrinking. Now, wasting. His voice, when it comes, is thin as mist, but the papers are in order. The succession redefined. The crown's path redirected. And in his journal, that cold, clipped diary of a king who never had the luxury of childhood, Edward writes nothing of fear. Just facts. Just names. Just orders. He has turned himself into a signature, and perhaps that's all he ever was, a living seal. A breathless will, a boy who tried to bend the future from his deathbed. Edward VI dies on a summer evening, July 6, 1553, in the grey stillness of Greenwich Palace. There are no great cries from the balcony, no tolling of cathedral bells that day, just silence. His physicians say it was consumption. Others whisper it may have been pneumonia or something darker, poison perhaps. But by then, Edward had been a dying boy for months. The cause was irrelevant. The outcome had always been written. He was 15, only 15, and when the breath leaves him, thin, rattling, soft, the court does not wail or weep. They move quickly, quietly, like men extinguishing a candle. In a locked room, he had been a king, yes, but now he is a problem. Mary and Elizabeth, the blood daughters of Henry, still live. And Edward's device for the succession has not yet been announced publicly, so they hide him. Not his body, not yet, but his death. For 4 days, England continues to pretend that the boy king still lives, even as his skin cools. Even as the room fills with the sweet, choking smell of decay, the court needs time, to prepare Jane, to secure the tower, to control the story. And so the boy who once ruled an empire is reduced to a secret behind a door. His body is embalmed, shrouded in lead and velvet, locked in a coffin that no longer fits the legend. There is no mourning procession through London. No grand public farewell. Instead, on August 8, 1553, over a month after his death, Edward VI is buried at night in Westminster Abbey, beneath the stone floor where few will ever walk or weep. Mary is now queen, having seized the crown from Jane Grey in just 9 days. The device has collapsed. The Protestant dream has been overturned. And Edward, he is not celebrated, not remembered, not spoken of. His funeral is Protestant in form, against Mary's Catholic wishes, but even that is contested. Bishop Thomas Cranmer, his closest religious ally, is barred from presiding. Edward receives a Latin sermon from someone else, a compromise. A footnote: there is no statue, no golden tomb, just a boy in the dark, lowered into history like an afterthought. Not even his sisters attend, not because they didn't care, but because he had written them out of his will. In the months that follow, Edward's name is almost erased. Mary ascends, bringing the old religion with her. The Reformation policies Edward fought for are undone. His device for the succession is declared treason. His advisors are hunted, executed, scattered. Jane Grey, his cousin, his chosen heir, is imprisoned. And by the next year, she is dead too, beheaded at 17. Edward's legacy is too inconvenient, too fragile, too tied to men now disgraced. Even in Protestant circles, his memory is uneasy. He had ruled, yes, but had he led? He had reformed, yes, but had he lived? The boy who once held a kingdom in his trembling hands vanishes from the stories, replaced by louder names. Bloody Mary, Virgin Queen, Father Henry. Edward becomes a shadow between giants. A Bloody Mary, Virgin Giants. A Bloody Mary, Virgin Queen, Father Henry. Edward becomes a shadow between giants. A blood ghost prince, a paper crown buried in stone. And yet, in his journals, there is still a trace of him, a child who tried to do right, a monarch who believed ideas could outlive bodies, a boy, dying, trembling, who still wrote down his truth until the very end. They called him a miracle, a savior, the son England waited decades for. But in the end, Edward VI was not remembered for how he lived, only for how he died, quietly, inconveniently, and far too soon. His was a crown that never fit, a body that never caught up to the legend it was meant to carry, a voice that barely had time to grow before history muted it. He was the only legitimate son of Henry VIII, And yet even his grave lies beneath the abbey floor, unmarked by grandeur, unvisited by pilgrims. No golden tomb, no throne, no legacy that lasted. But maybe that's the curse of being born too important to be a child, and too fragile to be a king. Because in the end, Edward was not simply a monarch. He was a vessel for fear, for ambition, for a nation trying to save itself with the breath of a boy Dodd. So what do we do with rulers who disappear? What do we owe the ones erased? Perhaps not a monument, but a memory. A whisper carried forward. So tonight, remember the boy behind the paper. Crown, the one who reigned from behind curtains. The one who rewrote the future with trembling hands and died trying to matter. Asterisk. If this story haunted you, share it. Let others meet the boy king history buried twice, once in stone and once in silence. Tell us in the comments. Do you think Edward VI was a true king, or just a symbol others used? Subscribe for more forgotten rulers, lost daughters, and kingdoms built on shadows. Because history isn't just about who won. It's also about who was never allowed. To begin,